Welcome to today's webinar, Planning for Climate and Health Impacts, Emergency Management Considerations. I'm Kristen Rodd, the Director of the Minnesota Climate and Health Program at the Minnesota Department of Health. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items. The phones will be muted during the session, so if you have questions during or after the presentation, please submit them using the chat function, which is located in the drop-down of the top of your screen. We will be saving about 20 minutes at the end of the webinar to answer your questions. Also, today's webinar will be interactive. We will be asking you two polling questions, one at the beginning of the presentation and one at the end. To respond, use the polling bar that will appear on the right side of your screen. At the very end of the session, we will be directing you to an evaluation survey. Please take the survey. We really appreciate your feedback, and all participants that complete the survey will be entered into a drawing to win a $25 gift card. And I am forwarding the slides here in just a moment. Today's webinar is being sponsored by the Minnesota Climate and Health Program, funded in part by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. With climate changes intensifying in Minnesota and around the globe, the Minnesota Climate and Health Program focuses on protecting public health and preventing further harms from climate change. We do this by engaging, resonating with the hearts and minds of the public, influencers, and decision makers to build a culture of health and climate action, informing, conducting credible, rigorous, and innovative research to facilitate health and climate in all policies, and guiding, providing technical assistance, tools, and products to expand and accelerate health and climate solutions. Please check out the plethora of our climate and health-related resources and trainings on our website listed on the slide. You can also learn more by signing up for our Climate and Health newsletter. To subscribe, visit the Minnesota Department of Health's Climate and Health webpage and click Get Email Updates on the upper right-hand side. So before I introduce you to our accomplished speaker, we'd like to gauge how familiar you are with climate data. Please answer the question that will appear on your screen and is on this slide. And I'm pulling that up right now for you. So thank you for responding. We are going to wait just a few more seconds. Wonderful. We really appreciate everyone responding to the questions. Now we are going to continue. So now it is with great pleasure for me to introduce our presenter for today's webinar, Dr. Brenda Hoppe. Dr. Hoppe is a research scientist with the Minnesota Department of Health Climate and Health Program. She studies climate change impacts on the health and well-being of Minnesotans with special research interests in modeling future impacts on drinking water from extreme rainfall, advancing climate and health vulnerability assessments, and developing methods for using climate projection data in multiple disciplines, including emergency management and public health. She earned her doctorate in environmental public health and toxicology at the Oregon State University and a master's in human physiology at the University of Oregon. In her free time, Dr. Hoppe chairs the Midwest Skateboarding Alliance that advocates for skateboarding as a component to building healthy communities and individuals. Welcome, Brenda.
Great, thanks, Kristen. And thank you to everybody that's joined us today. Before I start launching into the presentation, I really want to take just a few minutes to acknowledge all of our partners for making this year-long effort so rewarding. It was a very cross-disciplinary, collaborative project. Our team has really learned so much about emergency management and preparedness in our state, and we've really come to appreciate just how essential these sectors are for helping Minnesota communities become more climate resilient. And this project, involving as it did working with climate data and key data users like emergency management and preparedness practitioners, is really proof that climate change is not just this hopeless doom and gloom story. It's certainly a dramatic story with some pretty scary and surprising turns, but climate change is also a story of progress and innovation, collaboration and community. And people like those listed here are coming together from across a wide range of disciplines, pooling their creative energy and resources to tackle this unprecedented challenge to our health and our societies. So to all these wonderful people listed here, a very, very big thank you. And to the rest of you, please be encouraged. We are ready to respond to this challenge of climate change, and this project, I hope you'll soon agree, is an example of that kind of proactive response. So now let's dig into why you've all tuned in today, and that's to hear about this effort to develop climate data profiles for each of the 6 emergency management jurisdictions covering Minnesota. These profiles are intended to assist EMP, that's emergency management and preparedness practitioners, and their partners with understanding and planning for climate-related threats and associated disasters. And this project came about for a number of reasons. The main reason being climate change. The climate that we've known and become accustomed to for centuries, if not millennia, is no longer with us. And the one replacing it is markedly different. It's hotter, wetter, and prone to more extremes. And our climatologists expect these new climate characteristics to continue in the future, with temperature and precipitation patterns becoming even more extreme and volatile. Aspects of this new climate are contributing to more extreme weather and disasters that are costly and life-threatening. The graph here from the National Centers for Environmental Information at NOAA shows the different types of billion-dollar disaster events that have occurred in the U.S. just since 1980. And this puts a lot of pressure on our species to get acquainted as quickly as possible with this new climate and to start planning for the one that's ahead of us. Last year, 2017, was a pretty rough year for the U.S. Last year, 2017, was a pretty rough year for us as we experienced 16 weather and climate disaster events with losses over $1 billion each. And the cumulative cost of all these events actually exceeded $300 billion, which at the time set a new U.S. annual record. Now, given the wildfires that are raging in California and the fact that we're only a bit more than halfway through 2018, I can't help but wonder how long last year's record is going to last. And as a public health researcher, I'd be remiss if I didn't underscore that these dollar estimates do not take into account lost lives, injuries, lingering health effects, and the devastating impacts to well-being and quality of life from these events. Now, we're not Texas, which by far has suffered the worst in terms of weather-related damages, but Minnesota has had its fair share of suffering, on the order of about $10 to $20 billion in damages from weather and climate events over just the last 40 years. But it's not just climate change that's contributing to the increase in economic impacts from extreme weather. More and more, we're consolidating ourselves and all of our stuff, like our homes, our businesses, and our utilities in ever denser areas, particularly along coasts and shorelines. And we're encroaching into long-standing wildlife areas. So when a major storm blows through or a wildfire rages, there are just more people and assets in these vulnerable areas to damage or destroy. Better, more responsive planning to these disasters not only saves lives, but it can prevent the economic collapse of hard-hit communities. So So our program, the Minnesota Climate and Health Program, got our start around 7 years ago to study our changing climate and to address climate threats to Minnesotans. We're funded through the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention through their Climate Ready States and Cities initiative, which funds a number of states and cities to address climate change threats to health through a pretty rigorous process of study, planning, and action under what was called the BRACE framework, and BRACE stands for Building Resilience Against Climate Effects. And BRACE lays out a number of steps for studying climate impacts on health at both the state and local level, and it has had a pretty powerful influence on the public health field, pressing public health practitioners into learning about climate change, tasking us to apply our methods and approaches from public health to understanding the complexities of climate change. And then specifically, BRACE required that we public health practitioners start applying climate data to investigations of potential impacts on health and well-being. Besides grappling with climate data, BRACE also required that grantees take their understanding of climate threats to health and identify interventions or strategies for reducing those threats, and then implement these strategies. And I'll tell you, as much as learning all the ins and outs of climate data was a challenge, wrapping our minds around how to start implementing intervention strategies to address the very long list of potential health and well-being issues associated with climate change was daunting, to say the least, especially since our program has a very small staff, limited funding, and therefore our reach is pretty constrained. And then in addition, as we've developed as a program, something we've come to really appreciate is that there are already a lot of people engaged in the type of interventions that are needed to mitigate climate change impacts on health. Now, certainly, climate change is posing new challenges, but many climate change challenges are frankly ones that people have been tackling for years. Climate change is just making them worse and more frequent, like extreme weather events and their consequences, flooding, drought, heat waves, ice storms, landslides, and wildfires. These extreme events are familiar threats, especially here in Minnesota, where our 4 seasons can bring us some pretty rugged, wild weather at times. So being tasked with implementing interventions to reduce climate impacts to health, our program quickly came to appreciate that the most effective approach that we could take would be to identify those individuals already on the front lines grappling with some of the most pressing climate change threats like extreme weather and disaster events, and explore how we can support their knowledge and planning efforts around climate change. So who were those lucky individuals that we set our sights on? No surprise here, they were emergency management and preparedness practitioners. And that's the second reason for this project. Our mission is Minnesota's Climate and Health Program is to reduce climate change impacts on the health and well-being of Minnesotans. And while we do have some valuable knowledge and expertise related to climate change that we've gained over the years, there are others like EMP professionals that are more powerfully positioned to advance resiliency in our communities. So what puts emergency management and preparedness professionals in this powerful climate resiliency position? First, EMP professionals have a long, successful history of planning for and responding to extreme weather events and disasters of all kinds. They tend to have extensive partnership networks with a deep local coverage, striving to provide real-time assistance to impacted communities down to the household, even the individual level. And EMP professionals, being on the front lines, often witness firsthand the very personal and wide-ranging impacts of a disaster event on a community. And this experience not only inspires a deep commitment to the job, but it also provides EMP practitioners with knowledge of the various ways that climate-related disasters can disrupt and impact people's lives. And this is knowledge that those of us in population health, public health, and epidemiology desperately need to advance our work and improve our resiliency strategies. And then finally, EMP is not just a sector, it's a science. It's an applied science. The long-standing area of study that's been substantiated by lots of research, has compelling theories and frameworks like iterative risk management and scenario planning. that can offer a lot to those of us in climate and health as we work to advance not only our research base, but our applied intervention strategies. So when we started reaching out to state and local EMP partners about how to support their engagement in climate planning, one of the main things that we heard about was their need for data and information on what the climate change future may look like for Minnesota communities in a form that would be accessible and meaningful for emergency management and preparedness practitioners. And this was a request that we felt pretty equipped to knock out of the park, since we'd gained a lot of experience in the early days of our program, compiling climate change information for Minnesota and learning about climate data, working closely with our top-notch state climatologists who helped tutor us so patiently and kindly on the data and supported us in applying climate data to understanding future health threats. Now, this is an arena of a lot of action right now, this whole issue of how to connect important data users with the climate data that they need to develop effective climate resiliency strategies. And here in Minnesota, we certainly have a lot of historical data on weather and climate, thanks to our climatology office and our extensive committed citizen observer network. And these are folks across the state who commit to taking temperature and precipitation measures in their backyard and sending it into our state climatology office. And historically, when we wanted to plan for future weather events, we mined these data sets of past observed data, assuming that the past predicts the future and that patterns of historical weather could tell us what we needed to know about the probability of these patterns and events in the future. But in the era we're in now, the Anthropocene, as it's being called, that's marked by substantial climate instability, we need more advanced data. Data that can act like a crystal ball, allowing us a glimpse into our climate future so that we can start to plan for the future ahead of us and not base our actions on data that are culled from the climate behind us. Now, this being Minnesota, I've got to drop at least one hockey reference. So here's a little wisdom from Wayne Gretzky. And Wayne's been quoted as saying that one of the reasons for his domination in the rink is that he skates to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been. And that's the same philosophy that we need to guide us in our planning, certainly for extreme weather events, but really for all climate-related hazards. We need to focus on where we're headed, not where we've been. And climate data can help us tremendously in that effort. So what exactly are climate data? And when I refer to climate data, what I'm really referring to are climate projection data. And climate projection data are estimates of future temperature and precipitation measures or other climate characteristics that are derived from very sophisticated global climate models for time periods many decades into the future. And not only do these models capture the fundamental mechanisms of our planet related to physics and chemistry, biology, but they also incorporate a range of possible greenhouse gas emission scenarios, potential technology or population changes, and their influence on all those natural mechanisms. Now, climate modeling is certainly nothing new. We've been at it for quite a long time, but climate change has placed a whole new urgency on this area of research. And the knowledge growth that's both driving the research and then resulting from it has been and continues to be nothing short of extremely impressive. The figure on the bottom shows the type of progress that's been made in climate modeling, and a lot of that has to do with something called downscaling. And downscaling output from global climate models involves incorporating local data and local models to increase the resolution or the detail of the original global climate model output. And downscaling really is a game changer because by increasing the granularity of climate data, improving how well the output from global models represents climate locally now makes these data applicable and useful for planning. It makes the view from the crystal ball into our climate future a lot clearer and a lot more relevant to local needs and impacts. And here's yet another quote, borrowing, as I often do, from other people's wisdom. Peter Drucker is a well-known management guru, and he's been attributed with this quote, "What gets measured gets managed. And this captures why I'm such a huge proponent of climate projection data. These data aren't perfect, they are modeled, and they're burdened with a fair amount of complexity and some uncertainty, but they are the closest thing that we have to a crystal ball view into future climate changes. Familiarizing ourselves with these climate measures will empower us to manage our climate resiliency. And then the rate that these models and output data are improving is just incredible. So the bottom line is, the sooner we democratize climate projection data, the sooner we make these data accessible, particularly to powerful end users like EMP professionals, the more rapid and effective our advance on climate resiliency. And that's really the central goal of this project, to get climate projection data and summary trend information into the hands of our EMP partners so that they can start developing a proficiency in interpreting and using this information in their planning and response work. So the source of climate projection data that we drew on for these profile reports was the USGS's National Climate Change Viewer, and it's a well-vetted, very user-friendly data source. And there are actually quite a number of online sources for climate projection data that have recently become available online. However, putting these data in the hands of end users that aren't fully informed about how to use them is a bit like giving matches to a toddler, and I know this because I was, and to some extent, humbly, I admit, I still am that toddler. And without the guidance of Kenny Blumenfeld, Pete Boulay, and others with our state climatology office, there are a number of studies and research projects that may well have gone up in flames because I wasn't using or interpreting the climate data correctly on my own. And I say this not to scare anyone off of using climate projection data, but only to make the point that using these data sets and using them correctly for specific applications does require some guidance and support. And at MDH, we're aiming to facilitate this by convening a climate data technical work group, which I'll talk again about in my final slides. So now let me walk you quickly through these profiles, and they are officially already available on our program website. Again, our mission with these profiles was to respond to the request from our EMP partners for the latest information and data on climate change trends and threats specific to each region. And we are very interested in hearing from EMP practitioners out there and their partners as to how these profiles and the information in them are being used for your work, as well as any suggestions for how they can be improved in the next round of updates. But for now, we hope that people will find these profiles useful in informing mitigation plans and other emergency-related planning documents, engaging partners and local level planning, for instance, around infrastructure improvement projects or natural systems protections, and then also for factoring into response and recovery-related exercises and scenario planning efforts. Each profile contains an introduction with general information on climate change in Minnesota, the role for climate projection data in EMP planning, specific information on the targeted emergency management region, and then a bit more detailed discussion on specific climate change trends for Minnesota, including the importance of tracking population trends, since climate resiliency is based on addressing key population vulnerabilities within our communities. And then we dive into region-specific climate data, including projected population changes, alongside some baseline historical data so that you can see how the measure is projected to change from the past. There are data tables for season-specific maximum temperature, minimum temperature, and total precipitation, and each table is prefaced with some trend information that's specific for Minnesota. With regard to the population projection data are provided for both child and senior population changes, since these groups are often identified in the climate and health literature as having certain specific vulnerabilities, needs, or concerns that make them uniquely vulnerable to climate threats. And then we present a case study that aims at putting all this climate data information into a real world context that many readers an EMP may have actually had direct experience with. And this section of the profile is pretty unique, pretty exciting, and it's evidence of why you want to involve leaders of your intended audience when you're developing communication materials. And I just have to thank Eric Waggy, who some of you may know, for this excellent suggestion of putting estimates of future climate projections in context of a past natural disaster, a focusing event, to borrow a phrase from the emergency management field, because this makes all of these numbers become a lot more relevant and meaningful. Our intention with this case study section is not to say that climate change definitively caused these disaster events. That's actually a task that's been taken up by a rapidly advancing field of very sophisticated climate research called attribution science. What we are trying to do is compare future temperature and precipitation projections for the region with the same measures that were associated with a past disaster event to demonstrate the potential impacts of these future projected trends on our communities. Frankly, it's just not that meaningful to know that, for example, maximum summer temperatures may rise by 7 degrees in your region. But it is meaningful to know that the high temperatures associated with the recent drought event were similar to what's being projected as a new norm for your region just a few decades from now. So we spend a solid few pages on this case study or focusing event piece, and each profile features a different event that had a significant impact on that region. We asked our state emergency management and climatology partners to come up with a disaster event that was particularly notable for each region. And together, these 6 profiles cover many of the top climate-related disasters that are priorities for both the EMP sector and for our field of climate and health. And while we've tailored each individual profile to be useful for a specific region, I think there is definite value in reviewing all of them. And to facilitate this, we plan on compiling all 6 profiles in a long-form report that we'll release hopefully sometime this winter, along with some additional information and data, references, and resources. So for the case study section, we open with some background information on the event and a timeline of the incident. And then we provide some examples of the impacts from this event to underscore the cost to the community, both financially, but also to health and well-being. And then we provide the data. Graphs that provide a clear comparison between historical trends and future projections alongside data specifically associated with the disaster event for maximum temperature, minimum temperature, and total precipitation. So just 3 variables, so this is obviously not a sophisticated climate attribution analysis, but what it is an effort to highlight these data, jumpstart some conversations about what these data are communicating, and then hopefully inspire EMP practitioners and their partners to explore these data and their potential for planning, particularly since we're at a time when these data are improving so rapidly. And then finally, to wrap it all up, we provide a summary interpretation of the case study graphs, some final words on the importance of climate projection data, general next step suggestions for how EMP professionals can advance climate resiliency work in their area of expertise, and then a brief list of resources and references, which, as I said, will expand in the long-form report. Now, I just want to put a special emphasis on some text that we have in the summary that says, climate projection data continues to improve and should be considered as a priority to advance. Minnesota would benefit from a statewide, high-quality climate projection data set that's derived using the climate and environment features unique to our state, similar to data sets that have been developed for other states. And I talked earlier about downscaling, this method by which we can increase the detail and representativeness of output from global climate models by incorporating more local data. And downscaling gets you that data that's more relevant for planning, but it is costly. It requires a lot of computing power, expert climatologists to do the work, and then, of course, money. But states like Massachusetts, New York, and others have invested the resources into getting state-level downscaled data for their states that they're relying on substantially to guide their planning, from building design to protecting their harbors from sea level rise and hurricanes. Minnesota would benefit just as much from our own downscaled climate projection data set that could provide much better data and more types of climate characteristics, representing much more than just monthly minimum maximum temperature and total monthly precipitation. And there are a number of people, leaders from both the public and private sector, who are working hard right now to get Minnesota these data. But the effort can always use more allies. And since EMP practitioners are exactly the category of professionals we hope would use these downscaled climate data to plan and respond to climate change threats, we hope that folks from these sectors will support this effort. One way EMP practitioners and their partners can get involved is to sign up for our newsletter, and there are two major reasons to do this. One is because we'll send out notifications through our newsletter when the long form report for this project is released, again, I hope sometime this winter. And then two, we are planning to convene a climate data technical work group to provide support to public sector planners, researchers, analysts, engineers, managers, and others on where to get the right climate data for the project that you're interested in, best options for using these data, and assistance with interpreting their meaning and context of your project. And this work group will not only provide some training and information on climate data, but will also provide a space for people that are grappling with a climate data project and would like to brainstorm ideas, talk through obstacles, and get some peer feedback. So ultimately, we want to help people get to where the puck is going in their own areas of responsibility and expertise. And then next, besides staying in touch with our climate health program at MDH, please bookmark the DNR's website on climate change. Our state office on climatology is part of the DNR, and this website is an excellent place to get the bottom line information on climate change trends and impacts for Minnesota. And then finally, please stay in touch. We are extremely interested in learning from EMP practitioners how these profiles benefit your planning and decision-making, and probably even more so, how you think they could be improved. We're working closely with our state HSEM colleagues to incorporate these profiles in the state all-hazard mitigation plan, and with Stacy Stark and her group at the University of Minnesota Duluth, and Bonnie Huntreiser, who's our state's emergency manager extraordinaire, as all these great folks reach out to local planners with guidance on translating the state plan into local plans. So we hope that EMP practitioners all across the state will find lots of opportunities to comment on these profiles and explore how they can help, these profiles can help with preparedness and response planning. Because without a doubt, emergency management and preparedness practitioners are in a very powerful position to significantly advance our state's climate resiliency, saving lives and protecting our economies, but they need and they deserve all the help and resources that we can give them to do the great work that they do. So with that, I thank you so much for joining us for this webinar and for your interest in this project. And now I'm going to hand the session back to Kristen for the final polling question, and then I will be very, very happy to take questions or hear any concerns that folks may have on the call.